Nobody is coming to save you. Not your parents, not a partner, not a boss who finally notices your potential. Not some lucky break, some viral moment, some windfall that rearranges your whole life overnight. Not even, honestly, some future version of yourself who magically has it all figured out. And I know how that sounds at first. Like it's bleak. Like I'm telling you that you're alone and nobody cares. That's not what I mean at all. What I actually mean is something a lot more useful and a lot more hopeful if you let it be. Because here's the thing. A huge number of people spend years, sometimes their entire lives, quietly waiting for the right moment, waiting to feel ready, waiting for someone or something external to hand them permission to start the life they actually want. And today, I want to talk about why we do that, where that waiting comes from psychologically, and what happens the moment you actually stop doing it. Let's get into it. So there's a concept in psychology, sometimes called the rescue fantasy, and it shows up in a lot of different forms depending on the person. For some people, it's romantic. This idea that the right partner will come along and complete them, fix the parts of their life that feel broken, give their life direction it didn't have before. For other people, it's about career, waiting to be discovered, waiting for someone to finally recognize how talented or hardworking they are and hand them the opportunity they deserve. For other people, it's even more abstract, just this vague sense that one day things will click into place, somehow, through some mechanism they can't quite name. And the reason this fantasy is so common isn't because people are lazy or weak. It's actually rooted in something that made a lot of sense earlier in our lives. Think about childhood. When you were a kid, rescue was a completely normal and necessary part of how you survived. If something went wrong, an adult fixed it. If you were hurt, someone bigger and more capable stepped in. That wasn't a fantasy. That was literally how the world worked for you. You were dependent on other people because you had to be. You were a child. So your brain built a deeply wired association. When things are hard, someone capable comes and handles it. That pattern got reinforced thousands of times over the first 15, 18, maybe even 20-some years of your life. The problem is that pattern doesn't have a built-in expiration date. Nobody sends you a notification at 18 or 21 that says, hey, this mechanism you've relied on your whole life is now obsolete. Please update your operating system. You just slowly enter adulthood, still running some of that old code, expecting on some subconscious level that when things get hard enough, someone will step in. And for a while, that expectation might even keep getting partially reinforced. Parents still help, friends still show up, maybe a mentor appears at just the right time. So the belief doesn't get tested and broken. It just gets quieter, more buried, more automatic. But here's where it gets dangerous. The more dramatic and aspirational version of this fantasy isn't just someone will help, it's someone will save me from having to do the hard thing myself. And those are very different statements. Help is real and it matters. And needing help isn't a weakness, but waiting to be saved, waiting for someone else to do the work that only you can actually do, that's where people get stuck. Sometimes for years, sometimes for an entire life. Okay, so let's talk about why this waiting pattern is so sticky. Because if you ask most people directly, do you want to keep waiting for things to magically get better? Almost nobody says yes. Everyone wants progress. Everyone wants change. So why does the waiting persist? The honest answer is that waiting protects you from something. Specifically, it protects you from the risk of trying and failing on your own terms. Think about it this way. If you're waiting for a lucky break and it never comes, you can tell yourself a story that makes sense without it being your fault. The timing wasn't right. The opportunity didn't show up. Life is unfair. Someone else got the advantage you didn't get. But if you actually try, if you put in real effort toward the thing you want, fully, with no excuses lined up in advance, and it still doesn't work out, that's a completely different experience. That one's harder to explain away. That one touches something closer to your actual sense of capability, your actual worth. So a huge amount of waiting isn't really about patience. It's about self-protection. As long as you haven't fully tried, you get to keep believing that you could succeed if you really went for it. The moment you actually go for it and it doesn't work, that belief is on the line. This is sometimes called self-handicapping in psychology, when people unconsciously set up conditions that give them a built-in excuse for failure, specifically so the failure doesn't have to mean anything about who they are. And waiting to be saved is one of the most effective forms of self-handicapping there is.
because it's completely invisible. Nobody looks lazy while they're waiting for the right moment. Nobody looks like they're avoiding responsibility while they're staying patient. It looks like wisdom. It looks like maturity. Sometimes it even gets praised, but underneath it, very often, is fear, wearing a very respectable costume. There's also a simpler piece to this. Action requires you to actually face uncertainty. When you wait, the future stays vague and full of possibility. Anything could still happen. When you act, the future starts narrowing, becoming specific, becoming real. And specific, real outcomes can be disappointing in a way that vague possibility never is.
So your brain, which is wired to avoid pain more than it's wired to pursue reward, will often quietly choose the comfortable vagueness of waiting over the uncomfortable clarity of trying. None of this means you're broken or weak if you recognize this pattern in yourself. It just means you're human, running a very normal and very common psychological defense. The question is just whether you want to keep running it.
Let's talk about something that ties directly into this. The idea of the right moment. Because I think this is one of the sneakiest traps out there. Because it disguises itself as responsible thinking. I'll start once I have more savings. I'll leave once things calm down. I'll pursue that once I feel more confident. I'll fix that relationship once I'm in a better headspace. All of these sound reasonable. All of them sound like patience, like strategy, like waiting for the smart time to move. But here's the uncomfortable truth about the right moment. For most meaningful changes in life, it never actually arrives in the clean, obvious way people imagine it will. Confidence doesn't usually come before action, it comes from action. You don't get confident and then start. You start, badly and uncomfortably at first, and the confidence builds as a result of doing the thing repeatedly. People who wait to feel ready before they begin are often waiting for an effect to show up before its cause has even happened. Same thing with stability. People wait for life to calm down before making a big change. But for a lot of people, life doesn't calm down on its own. It calms down because of decisions they make. The chaos isn't a phase that resolves itself. It's often a symptom of avoided decisions piling up. This is part of why someday is one of the most dangerous words in the English language. Someday isn't on the calendar. Someday has no deadline, no accountability, no actual moment where it has to happen. Someday is just a polite way of saying not now, indefinitely, while still feeling like you have a plan. And the brutal math behind all of this is that time passes regardless of whether you're ready for it to. 5 years from now is gonna arrive whether or not you've done the thing. And the only real question is whether 5 years from now you'll have built something during that time, or whether you'll be in roughly the same spot, still waiting for the moment that never quite showed up. I'm not saying impulsive, reckless decisions are the answer either. There's a difference between thoughtful action and chaos for its own sake. But there's a wide, very real gap between thoughtful action and what most people are actually doing, which is indefinite waiting disguised as thoughtful planning. So let's talk about the other side of this. What actually happens when someone stops waiting to be saved and starts operating like they're the one responsible for their own outcome? The first thing that tends to happen, somewhat counterintuitively, is relief, not immediately. Usually there's a period of discomfort first, because taking ownership means you can no longer blame external circumstances quite as easily. But underneath that discomfort is something that feels a lot like freedom. Because here's what waiting actually costs you that people don't talk about enough. It costs you agency. As long as you're waiting for someone or something else to change your situation, you are, by definition, not in control of your own life. Your well-being is hostage to forces outside yourself. That's an exhausting, disempowering place to live, even if it doesn't always feel that way day to day. The moment you genuinely accept that nobody is coming, something shifts. You stop scanning the horizon for rescue and start asking a much more useful question. Given that this is up to me, what's the next actual move? That question is small. It's not, how do I fix my entire life? It's, what is the next concrete thing I can do today that moves this forward? And that question, asked consistently over time, is genuinely how most real change happens. Not through one dramatic moment of transformation, but through a long accumulation of small decisions made by someone who stopped waiting for permission. There's also something that happens to your relationship with disappointment once you stop waiting to be saved. When you're waiting for external rescue and it doesn't come, that failure feels like the world failing you. It breeds a kind of helpless bitterness. But when you're actively building something yourself and it doesn't go the way you hoped, that's just data. That's just information you use to adjust the next attempt. It's a completely different emotional experience, even when the outcome looks similar from the outside. This is also, by the way, when other people's help actually becomes most useful to you. Not before, because help works best when it's additive to your own effort, not a substitute for it. People who are already moving tend to attract more support, more opportunities, more genuine help than people who are standing still waiting for someone to move them. Not because the universe is rewarding effort in some mystical sense, but because action is visible, and visibility creates opportunity in a way that waiting never does. So the irony here is almost funny if you sit with it. The fastest way to actually get help in your life is often to stop waiting for it and start moving without it. Help finds people in motion far more often than it finds people standing still. Okay, so I don't want to leave this purely abstract, because I think the idea of take ownership of your life can sound nice in a video and then completely evaporate the moment you put your phone down. So let's get specific about what this actually looks like in practice. It starts with noticing the places in your life where you've been quietly waiting. And I mean actually noticing. Not just nodding along to this video and assuming it applies to someone else. Where have you been telling yourself, once X happens, then I'll do Y? Once I have more time, once I feel more confident, once things settle down, once I find the right person to help me. Sit with that for a second, because almost everyone has at least one of these running in the background.
Once you've identified it, the next move isn't to demand some massive transformation of yourself overnight. It's to ask, what is the smallest real action I could take this week that doesn't depend on anyone else showing up first? If it's a career thing, maybe that's updating one document, sending one message, researching one option, instead of waiting for an opportunity to land in your lap. If it's a financial thing, maybe that's looking at one number you've been avoiding, instead of waiting to magically feel ready to deal with money. If it's a relationship thing, maybe that's having one honest conversation you've been putting off, instead of waiting for the other person to bring it up first. None of these things are dramatic. None of them require you to have your whole life figured out. They just require you to stop outsourcing the first move to someone or something else. And I'll be honest with you, this gets easier the more you do it, but it rarely gets completely comfortable. There's always going to be a small voice that prefers the safety of waiting. That's normal. That voice doesn't fully go away. You just get better at noticing it and choosing to act anyway. The people who seem to have figured life out, the ones whose situations seem to have somehow worked out for them, in a lot of cases, what actually happened is much less mysterious than it looks from the outside. They simply stopped waiting earlier than most people do and started making small, unglamorous decisions in the direction they wanted to go, long before anyone was paying attention or cheering them on. Nobody filmed that part. Nobody posts the version of themselves quietly doing the unremarkable work before anything worked out. So from the outside, it looks like luck or talent or some break they got that you didn't. But underneath, almost all of it is just somebody who decided at some point to stop waiting to be saved. So here's where I want to leave this. Nobody is coming to save you. Not because you're alone, not because nobody cares, and not because you're somehow less deserving of help than anyone else. It's just that the kind of change that actually matters in a life has to start from the inside, with someone deciding to move before any outside help can really attach itself to anything.